was in the 4th edition of the textbook, it was problem 80. If you have the 4th edition, because I told you those are okay to have too, you would actually have this problem. If you don't have the 4th edition, you have a 5th edition book, that's why I've cut and pasted it in here. I know it's not easy to read in class, but this way you would have it. You'll have it on your PowerPoint. You'll be able to go back and look through and read everything about the problem. That's the textbook problem. It doesn't ask you to do anything beyond solving it. So we made some little extra sensitivity analysis kind of solver tables, because really, seriously, with most models, you want to, after the fact, potentially be looking at other things that you could do. You guys gotta stop talking, because it's gonna be bothering people around you, okay? Anyway, so potentially you might have other things that you would be asking about, and these are the 3 that we just threw in there as potential questions. But it also gives us the ability to look at some ways that we answer sensitivity analysis questions. If you ran through this problem, I'll do the real quick version of it. I think they took it out because it's just kind of an outdated sort of thing. It doesn't really matter what we manufacture. Okay, we happen to manufacture these little things called M-tunes that are like I-tunes, but that doesn't really matter. We manufacture something. And we have information that at the beginning of the first month, we have $100,000 in cash, we have 15 employees, we know what the capacity is for what each worker can make, we know what the capacity for each machine is. We have some information in there about costs, holding costs, cost of machines, raw materials, how much we pay people, how much it costs to hire and fire them. We have projections for the next 6 months. That's how long we're going to do our aggregate plan is over 6 months. We have projections for the next 6 months on what we think demand will be, but we have the ability to increase our demand by advertising. So like for every $10 of advertising, we can get an extra unit of demand. We do have a max budget of $50,000 a month on advertising. We sell them for $75. There's a bunch of information in here about how we don't want to have non-negative, we want to make sure we have non-negative inventory, non-negative cash. We don't want to backlog or go, negative on the inventory. We don't ever want cash to fall below 0. There's also some sequencing issues involved. We're going to buy the machines very first thing we're going to do at the beginning of month 1. But the other sequencing thing, you kind of need to be aware of when we get into the model is that we do all the hiring and firing of people right at the beginning of the month. This is the assumption for the model. Okay, is that we do all the hiring and firing right at the beginning of the month so that we therefore have whatever the net available workers are for the whole month. Okay, they're available to us all month long. So that's one of the assumptions that we make. There's lots of numbers in this, and these numbers are all on the worksheet. So when you go to the worksheet, you see a bunch of stuff. You see those initial cash and workers, you see the capacity levels, you see a lot of costs, you see the selling price, a bunch of stuff here, but that's actually not the only place we have it. We put the budget, the advertising budget numbers down here. We put the projected demand for the 6 months, which again, we have that we plan on selling what the demand is. And so it's our best representation, so that's what we're counting as sales also, how much we sell. So the non-negatives, keeping the inventory above 0, keeping the cash above 0. Got a lot of blue cells even mixed in other places. You can see from this that we have a lot of light red changing cells, that we have a lot that we're asking Excel to do. We're asking Excel to figure out how many machines we should purchase over the course of this, that's just one time only, and over the course of the 6 months, how many people we should hire and fire, how many items we should produce, and how much we should spend on advertising. Okay, so we're actually asking Excel to do all that. So when we were back working on that color and black and white t-shirt thing, and I said, you could play around with these numbers, and you'd eventually come up with whatever was the best one. There's just no way on earth you're going to manipulate these numbers in such a way that you're going to be able to figure out, this is definitely a problem for Solver, not for us. But so there are a lot of things that we have to do, and a lot of things we have to calculate, because we have to know about people available. Why? Because it factors into our capacity level, which constrains our production. So there are a lot of things you have to know. You have to know how many machines, because that constrains production as well. And calculating things that have to do with the inventory levels, the new demand if you advertise, all that kind of stuff. But the bottom line is, our goal in all of this is to maximize profit. Okay, so our objective is gonna be to maximize this profit. And as such, while there are a lot of things up here we have to calculate and we have to constrain, eventually at some point, we gotta get some cost calculations in here, because the cost calculations lead us to profit, which is our objective, okay? And that's the one that we're trying to maximize. So there are just a lot of things that have to be done, okay? There's a lot of steps to this. So, we're gonna start at the beginning, because this is as good a place as any to start. Again, what you'll notice on shells is that, you know, the cells that have the borders around them are the ones where you're gonna be doing something, not the, you know, we're not picking how many machines. Excel is gonna tell us how many machines. But we can start filling in things about the workers right here. For instance, how many workers do we have at the beginning of month 1?
15.
We have 15, and they told us that up there in B4. Okay, so all we do at the beginning of month 1 is reference B4. Okay, that's it. But after that, in month 2, how would we know how many workers we have at the beginning of month 2?
The beginning plus the hired less the fired.
Okay, so we are gonna make that calculation, because we need to know that, for instance. But when I'm asking what we begin month 2 with, let's assume that calculation is already made for other months, because what you're trying to get at is really how many are available to you in a month. Okay, so yes, that will be how we figure out how many are available to us in a month. But when we get to month 2, the beginning of month 2 is gonna be what?
The end of month 1.
The end of month 1. Okay, and that's gonna be true of people, it's gonna be true of cash, it's gonna be true of inventory, it's just gonna be true of a whole bunch of things. That what you begin a new time period with is what you ended the last time period with. Now, are we gonna need to calculate what you said? Yeah, we will need to calculate that, but that'll be down here. Because the beginning of month 2 just simply is whatever we figure out is the end of month 1. And it's actually what's available to us all through month 1. We'll talk about that. Okay. If I was ever gonna make a mistake on a model, it's gonna be this one. Who knows? I might make one while we're in here. But that's because this one is so tedious. There are so many little places that you can make typos. So you're gonna see me doing a little overkill here, because I want you to do it. Even more so than you did in the product mix problem, is every time you put something in, go to the end of that row and check to see, because there's gonna be a lot of relative and absolute addressing and just a lot of stuff. Just go into the end of the row and check. If you may get tired of watching me do this, but it's okay. All right, so I put that in. I move over to like month 5, click on it. What's the beginning of month 5? The end of month 4. So just do that kind of thing. All right, now we do have to know what's available to us. And again, this goes back to that assumption that's in the problem, that all hiring and firing happens right at the beginning of the month, so that people would be available to us for the whole month. What's the number that are available to us during month 1?
First 15.
What was that?
The first 15.
Yeah, start with how many did you have at the beginning of the month? Then do what?
Plus what you hired.
Oops, did I just do an underscore? Plus what I hired, and then minus what you fired. Now understand that in this mathematical model, where there are not people actually associated with these things, that it is never going to happen that you're gonna hire and fire in the same month, is it? Okay, that like doesn't make sense, because your net result just costs you all kinds of money. I mean, why would you do that? That would not happen. In reality, do people hire and fire? Of course they do, but for other completely different reasons. We're just looking at staffing demands, okay? We're not looking at actual people and why you might fire them because they're lazy and they're not doing their job. You know, that's a whole different thing. This is never gonna happen that you hire and fire in the same month, but your formula has to be set up to take into account both, because you don't know which months you're gonna hire and which months you're gonna fire. So the formula has to be generic to handle both, even though it's not gonna happen, both of them in the same month. So B19 plus B20 minus B21, and you copy that, and yes, I know it's a super simple formula, but you would go over here, click on it. It did not need absolute addressing because it was all lined up in the column that you were in, and it still is, all lined up in the column that you're in. Okay. And so all is good, right? So those are relatively straightforward. Does the worker section make sense? Okay. We're going to move from that into the production capacity section right here. So here's what happens. You've got numbers up here that tell you that each worker can make 600 units a month, each machine can make 900 units a month. So we get that. So therefore, when we're asking Excel to tell us how many we produce each month, it can't exceed what our workers or our machines could do, okay? Actually, whatever's the lesser of those two, it can't exceed, okay? It can't exceed that. So that production number is constrained by these two things. So let's look at the worker capacity. What's our worker capacity?
The number available times the budget per worker.
Yeah, so whatever we have available in month one, which happens to be in B22, multiplied by how much can each of those people make, well, that's up there in B6. So B22 times B6. I have a tendency to put whatever is going to be my absolute reference one in second, only because then I just sort of press F4 and I'm done. But you do need to make sure. I know that you really only need this in front of the column, but for me it's faster just to press the F4 and it puts it in front of everything. The B22 times B6, the B6 part needs to be an absolute reference, at least for sure the B has to be. And then copy that across. And again, here's the spot checking thing. I move to another month further over, I click on it, and I make sure that in month 5, this is month 5 workers times the 600 over here, and that didn't, copy into some strange place. So I'm gonna check on those kind of things. Okay. How about the machine capacity? What's my machine capacity? How many can I make?
Machine purchase one.
Yeah, so however many machines we purchase, which we don't know what that's gonna be yet. And that actually isn't gonna change either, so I'm gonna press F4. Multiplied by, well, how many can each machine make? That's right up there in B5. So it's B16 times B5, B5 times B16, don't care. Both of them need to be absolute references. This number isn't actually going to change because we buy the machines at the beginning and we keep them the whole time. We don't buy more, we don't get rid of them, we don't, it's not that. We buy them and then we use them. So the B16 times the B5, that number will be the same the entire time. Both of those should have absolute references. Copy it over. I move over to month 4 and I check on it, and fortunately, it's still referencing how many machines times how many per machine. Okay, so that's good. Okay. So a real quick note about this whole production capacity constraints. There's 2 of them in here. So I know on one hand, logically, you would think like this. What I produce has to be less than or equal to what would be the capacity of the machines, right? Okay. What I produce also has to be less than or equal to the capacity of the people capacity, the human capacity, workers. The thing about greater than, less than signs on the worksheet is that they have to be able to be read the way we conventionally read things, which is top to bottom or left to right, okay? So while in our minds we might logically be thinking our production level has to be less than or equal to our worker capacity, on the worksheet it's written where we read this one first, okay, because it's above. So our worker capacity has to be greater than or equal to our machine production quantity. Our production quantity. Machine's a whole different thing. Okay, does that make sense? this has to follow with the way that a person would read it. Top to bottom, left to right, it has to follow with that. I don't actually care when you get to solver and you're putting it in a solver, if you say this has to be greater than this, or if you say this has to be less than that. Well, don't look at that. This has to be less than that. Okay, I don't care which way you put it into solvers when I put it in right. You know, I mean, it doesn't matter to me if you logically you think about it one way, but on the worksheet, it has to be the way a person would read it, okay? Because saying one is greater than the other, or flipping it and saying this one's less than, I mean, that's the same thing. That's the same thing. So I don't care when you put it into solver, but on the worksheet, it has to read properly. It has to read correctly, top to bottom or left to right, the way you would read the things. Okay, so we'll get to that because we'll be putting it in a solver at some point in time. The next thing in there has to do with advertising. So this is not something we're figuring out. This is something we're letting Excel solver tell us. How many advertising dollars should we spend every month? But that is constrained by the fact that we have a budget. And the budget is that we can't spend more than $50,000 a month. There isn't any other calculation for us to do here, okay? But that feeds into this demand, okay? This is inventory and demand, but it feeds into demand, okay? We know what we believe that the demand will be over the next 6 months, but that's without advertising. We have this ability to advertise and for every $10 get an additional unit of demand. And so we need to calculate what advertising would be after, what demand would be after advertising in this cell, because that's going to be our new demand. It's going to be our demand with advertising. What would that be? How do we calculate that? Where would we start?
What would be the original demand?
Start with the original demand, because you have that regardless of whether you advertise or not. Okay, start with the original demand. Then add to that, what?
The $10 times what would you spend for advertising? Or divided?
Yeah,
So
what?
The advertising money over the $10.
Exactly, okay. So then you're gonna spend some amount. We don't know what Excel's gonna tell you to spend, but you're gonna spend some amount, that's gonna be 32. For every $10 that you spend, you get an additional unit. So take that B32 and divide it by, there's the $10 up there in B13. Okay. That B13 reference, the stuff that's referenced up there in the input area, that stuff needs to have absolute references to it because you're not gonna want it to move when you copy it over. So it's B37, that's your original demand, plus B32, what you spend, divided by B13, the $10. Okay, so that'll give you an extra unit for every $10 you spend. Okay. And I'm going to check that. I'll go to month 5, I'll click on it. I see the highlights in month 5 for original demand and advertising of that particular month, but I make sure that this stayed over here on this. Okay. What's next? I don't know why they didn't just mention and us put it up there, or why we didn't just put it up there in the top numbers that our beginning inventory was 0. It doesn't really matter, it's in blue here. Our beginning inventory is 0. Okay, so we start with no units. But by the time we would get to month 2, what would we begin month 2 with? The end of month 1. So that works like the same way for this as it did with people. So reference back to the end of month 1 in month 2, that's a reference to B41. Copy that over. Check it. I know, it's overkill, but we're checking it. You know, the beginning of month 6 is the end of month 5. We got it. What is ending inventory? What is ending inventory? How would we calculate that? What do we start with? Beginning inventory. And do what?
Plus.
Numbers produced minus the.
Plus the number that we produce. Minus what? amount that we sell. Be sure that you're using B38 for that, okay? B40, that's our beginning inventory. Add the production number up there in B27, subtract what we sell. It has to be this one, the one after advertising, because that's the one that, you know, well, that's the actual sales. So B40 plus B27 minus B38 does not need absolute references on it, but you know, we can always check that and see, you know, everything lines up. This plus that minus that. Okay. So all these things had to happen. Like, we have to make these calculations. One, because they're gonna figure into our costs. Another reason, because they have to be constrained in some ways. Like, people don't have to be constrained, but production capacity is a constraint, and advertising budget is a constraint. But these things all have costs associated with them, so we eventually do have to get to this point right here. Okay. Let me point out something before we even get here. I know that when you put these numbers in initially, and you haven't solved for a problem, that there are this many things that Solver's gonna be filling in for you, that numbers start to look a little weird. Like, ending inventory is this negative number. It's this negative number, and then you carry it forward, and then you add production. Of course, there's no number up there, and you subtract sales where there is a number, and it just keeps getting worse, and you've got these negative numbers. But that is gonna happen. Couple of things here. Obviously, when it solves, that can't happen because there's gonna be a constraint here saying you can't go negative. It's not going to anyway, because there will be numbers placed in these other cells. If this kind of stuff bugs you, like you're thinking, oh, I don't know if my formulas are right when I see this weird negative inventory number, then go up into red changing cells and put dummy variables in. You're okay doing that, because then when Solver solves, it takes yours out and puts its numbers in anyway. So if you wanna just put numbers in there that help you to see if formulas look like they're working, that's perfectly okay to do. Okay, that's perfectly okay. Anyway, so we'll put that. But all of this has to lead down to cost calculations, because eventually we have to get to the point where we calculate profit, because it's our objective. It's the thing we're trying to maximize. So that's what we're gonna do here, get to all of our costs. Well, starting with cash, we were told that we had how much cash at the beginning of month one?
100,000.
Yeah, so we just referenced that cell, which is way up here in B3. So we had $100,000 start out with, we just referenced that cell. At the beginning of month two, we're gonna have how much cash? Beginning of month two, we start with how much cash? No, it's simpler than that. I mean, it's just what's above what you said.
End of month one.
End of month one, end of month one, same thing. People, cash, inventory, we start the beginning of a time period with where we ended the previous time period. Okay. And then carry that one through the rest of the months. Spot check it, I know, seems like a lot to spot check every one of these, but it's a good idea. All right. One of the costs we're only going to incur one time, and that's right at the beginning of the first month when we buy the machines. It's actually the very first thing we do in the whole sequence of everything. And so that cost of machines only is gonna show up here in month one, and that is what?
The cost of buying a machine.
Yeah, the cost of buying a machine times how many you purchase. This isn't gonna be copied anywhere, it doesn't happen again, you don't have to worry about absolute references, that's just it, it's B8 times B16, that's all it is. B16 times B8, doesn't matter which way you put it in there. Okay, what are hiring costs? How would I calculate hiring costs?
The number hired times that I'm comfortable with.
So in that particular month, I'm in month one right now, how many people do I hire in month one? Multiply that by, how much did it cost to hire people? That's up to B11. So B20 times B11. most all of these are gonna follow the same pattern, and so I'm always gonna put the first number in, like, well, the number you hired, now the cost next, because then I'm gonna press my F4 key, which makes that one absolute, because that's gonna be a reference to one of those ones in that input area that needs to be absolute. So you're gonna see me do that every time. B20, how many people did you hire in month 1 times B11, that's the hiring cost, and that B11 needs to be an absolute reference. I'll copy that. I'll check it. Here it is, month 5. How many did I hire? How much did that cost? I check that to make sure that did the right thing. What about firing costs? What's that gonna be?
How many I fired, fired calls?
Same idea, same idea. How many were fired? How much did it cost to fire them? I'm gonna make that last part absolute reference, so it's B21 times B12. The B12 is the part that needs to have the absolute reference on it. How many did you fire? How much does it cost to fire them? Copy that over. Move to month 4, look up here and see, oops, click on that, move up here. Move up here. Month 4 fires times the firing cost, everything worked. All right, what about wages?
Number available, for wages.
The number of people that are available, because that was the whole idea. You hire and fire right at the beginning so that they're available to you all month, which means you have that capacity, but also means you have to pay them. Because they like to pay. So the number available in B22 multiplied by B10. I'm gonna make that one an absolute reference. And so now I've got B22, the number of people available that month have to be paid. Times B10, how much we pay them. The B10 is gonna be the one that's the absolute reference. I'll copy it. I'll move to another cell. I'll check it. It's just a good idea. How many are available in month 6 times how much do we pay them? What about advertising costs? What do we put in for advertising cost?
The advertising money that you spend,
Say again.
the advertising money that you spend.
Yeah, and that's it. I mean, there's really no other calculation here. It's just that Excel is going to fill that in for us at some point in time. So it's just a reference to B32. That's how much we're spending on advertising, is whatever Excel tells us to spend on advertising. So that's a pretty easy one. I know, you don't really have to spot check it, but you still can. So that's just B32, you copy it over. How about holding cost? What's holding cost?
End of month inventory times holding cost.
Yeah, what do you have at the end of the month in inventory? And multiply that by somewhere up here, we had a holding cost right there in B7. So I'm gonna make that one the absolute reference. It's B41 times B7, and B7 needs to be the one that's the absolute reference. Copy it across. Go to a different month, kind of check it. Where is that? Yep, the month 5 end of inventory and the $2 cost. Again, these numbers look really weird. Remember, we had negative inventory because there was no production number in there. So we have negative inventory. Negative inventory is gonna give us negative holding costs. Yes, that's all very strange looking now, but leave it just like it is, because when it solves, that's still gonna be the right formula. And if it bugs you too much, go put dummy variables into the changing cells just so you can see if your formulas look like they're working correctly. All right, raw material costs would be the number produced times, it's up here somewhere, the actual raw material cost. So B27 times B9, I'm gonna gonna make the B9 the absolute reference one. So B27 times B9, B9 absolute reference. And over here, I'm gonna check it. You get tired of doing that. But anyway, the production number for that month times the $6 raw material cost. Okay. Got through those. All right, what's the total cost? Yeah, I think I heard somebody say it. You just sum up these costs. Now it is weird because in the first month, you have a cost that you don't have in the other months. And so I'm going to go ahead and say, sum it up from B48 to B55. That doesn't bother me a lot, that it's not exactly the same on the other months. I'm probably still just gonna copy it and be well aware of the fact that there are some empty cells in there, and that doesn't bug me that much. If it bugs you, fix it. You don't have to have those in there. But nonetheless, I'm just summing up that area that has all the costs in it. For row, because of month 1, I'm going from row 48 to 55. Okay, so what's the revenue? What's the revenue for month 1?
Sold times the unit price.
Yeah, and be sure when you do the amount sold that you're doing row 38, okay, which is the sold, which is the new demand, and demand after advertising. So B38 times, you sell them for $75 a piece, that's B14. Make the B14 the absolute reference. So B38 times B14, the B14 is the absolute reference. Copy it across. I copy it across. I spot check. Well, let's see. I can't see them both at the same time, but the month 5 sold amount, the selling price. And then, we're getting there, the end of month cash. What's the end of month cash going to be? Now that's the profit for that month, and that will factor in here. But what's the end of month cash? Where do we start?
The beginning of the month.
Start with the beginning of the month cash, then do what?
Minus cost plus revenue.
Yeah.
Or either.
Either way, I always do the plus first, but anyway, plus the revenue minus the cost, which we know is profit. I mean, you were saying that before, it's like the revenue minus the cost, but you have to start with initial cash, then add in revenue and subtract cost. So it's gonna be B46, the initial cash, plus the revenue number in B58, minus the cost number in B57. That's all lined up in one column, don't need absolute references. We can always check it, all lined up, everything's good. The last formula. How do we get the profit? Over that 6-month aggregate planning period, what is the profit?
Some of the revenue minus the sum.
You can take the sum, I got a little extra thing in there. Take the sum of all of the revenue, 6 cells, and subtract out the sum of all the costs for 6 months. So here's the thing, could this have been drawn out on this worksheet and expanded in the calculation? Sure, it could have been. You could have had a profit for each of the months and then summed it all up. Or you could have summed up all the costs, summed up all the revenue, and then taken the difference between them. But they didn't do that. This model wasn't set up that way. This model was set up with one cell, calculated all in one cell. That's fine too. People are gonna look at models differently. People are gonna expand and condense things in different ways, and that's okay. This, you gotta have to do whatever, the model tells you to do. In this case, we needed to sum up all the revenue and subtract the sum of all the costs. And that, if you will notice, is exactly $100,000 less than what you see as end of month 6 cash. Because the end of month 6 cash is $100,000 higher because of what?
Non-cash and non-money.
Because you started out the whole thing with $100,000 in cash. Okay, so during that time, the profit, revenue minus cost, was just the 2,647,000, but there was an additional 100,000 already there. That's why you see that in your end of month 6 cash amount. Okay, like I said, if I'm ever gonna mess up, this will be the model to do it, because it has a lot of places you can mess up. Okay, and so when I say to be really careful, I just think it's easier for you if you are really careful, and it's just to your benefit to do that. But we're ready to go into Solver now. So we go to Solver, I mean, all formulas are functions, everything's filled in. We're ready to go to Solver, and let me do something real quick, because I can fit this over here if I do this. And our objective is what?
Profit.
Yeah, profit. I mean, that was the whole reason we were doing all this. It's profit. It's B63, and we want to, of course, maximize that. So B63, the profit cell, that's the one we want to maximize by changing. Well, there's a lot of stuff we want to change, or I should say we want Solver to change for us. The way that I put in a lot of these is just move to whatever the first one is, hold the control key, and just start selecting them all. You can put it in, put a comma, put the next one, put a comma, but the holding control key is going to do that for you. So we're letting Excel tell us how many machines to buy. I'm holding the control key. We're letting Excel tell us how many people to hire and fire over the course of the 6 months. I'm still holding the control key. We're letting it tell us how many to produce each month. Still holding the control key. And we're letting it tell us the advertising. And that gets all of those light red changing cells in there. And we can certainly do it ourselves, this, comma, then the next one, you know, but that's the way I get it in there. Maybe a little bit faster, maybe it's not faster for you. It's up to you. So there are a lot of changing cells. We thought that would make it impossible for us to do this ourselves. Now we begin to add some of the constraints that we know we need to add in here. What's one constraint that you see? Yeah, so I actually, because it wasn't really just like in the little book problem and on that page, I actually put it onto the worksheet so you'd know, hey, put integer constraints onto some of these things. One of those things that needs an integer constraint is the number of machines. We can't buy partial machines. So B16, that needs to be integer. Okay, so that's one of them. B16 needs to be integer, okay? I also show on here integer beside hiring and firing. I can select all of those at once because they're in a contiguous space. No, I can't do the other one that way. So I can pick up everything from B20 to G21, hiring and firing over the 6 months, and that also needs to be integer. So those are the ones that need to be integer. So I specifically state that. I will always kind of tell you that, when to do it and not to do it. All right, and now we add what other constraints?
Number produced.
Yeah, so now we can start putting the capacity constraint in. And again, now at this point, because you've gone to the trouble to make sure that this logical operator is right, if you just want to say this row greater than this row, that's fine. If somehow in your mind it still makes more sense to say it the other way, that's fine. I think most people at this point kind of just want to just put in what it says, which is the row 25, B to G 25, has to be, and you've got to put this in, greater than or equal to B to G 27. That's the worker capacity constraint. The amount the workers can make in 25 has to be greater than or equal to what you produce in 27, row 27. And then the other capacity constraint is the one where, still going in order this direction, the number produced, B to G 27, has to be less than or equal to the machine capacity, B to G 29. That gets those two capacity constraints in there. So far, so good? What's another constraint?
Advertising line.
Yeah, the advertising has a budget. So B to G 32 has to be less than or equal to B to G 34. In other words, you can't spend more than $50,000 a month on advertising. Row 32 less than or equal to row 34. When I say row 32 and then 34, they're all B to G. Okay, what's another constraint?
Inventory.
Non-negative inventory. That's what they wanna make sure that your inventory, you don't do any backlogging. That section of the book, we're not doing the backlogging section in chapter 4. Okay, so the inventory levels that you see, BDG 41, have to be greater than or equal to 0. And I've got that kind of listed out across BDG 43. So that's non-negative inventory. One more, which is cash. We do the same thing, non-negative cash. So the cash number, which goes from B to G 59, is greater than or equal to the zeros that you see in B to G 61. So row 59, greater than or equal to row 61. You have a bunch of constraints. Okay. You're making sure that machines are integral, that number of people hired and fired is integral. You've got the worker capacity constraint, the machine capacity constraint, the advertising, the non-negative inventory, and non-negative cash. They're all in there. Okay, so you should have, when it's all said and done, a couple of integer ones and then 5 other ones besides that, which you're ready to solve. And when you solve, luckily, solver worked, didn't get any weird infeasibilities or anything like that. Click OK. The number you should end up with as the profit that will come out of your plan is $3,785,300. Hopefully that's what everybody got. Like I said, I do know that if there's ever going to be a problem, it's going to be on this one.
Is it simplex LP?
It is simplex LP. Yeah, that's just stated there like that. But let me tell you, it's not just, you're not just looking at what is my profit from all this. This is your plan. This is your plan. Go buy 14 machines, hire 4 additional people, and get to work producing 11,200 items. Spend all of $50,000 on advertising and keep going. Hire next month, hire another person, produce 1,200 units, spend all your money again on advertising. You don't hire anybody in month 3, but you do produce 12,000 units and you spend all the advertising every time. Then you start firing people. Now that's kind of interesting. You probably start firing people because we did this 6-month thing. And it's like it's as if it ends at the end of 6 months. If we were rolling it forward, you might not be firing people. You know, this would change if we were rolling it forward, but we're not. We're looking at it as a snapshot moment in time for this 6 months. That's why it kind of ends up firing people near the end. Yeah.
What's in C29?
C29 is, well, everything was the same. Starting out with B29, you have B16 times B5, and they both need absolute references on them. And then everything is exactly the same. I mean, every thing across row 29 is the same.
There's the box.
The box, yeah. So it's B63, the profit cell that we're maximizing. And then you've got the 2 integer constraints in there. The one is on B16, machines. The other one's on the people, hiring, firing, B20 to G21. Then you start having all the other constraints. You gotta make sure your lessons and greater thans are in there correctly.
Oh, B16 is an integer,
match up
that's
with
why.
what you have on the worksheet, then you kind of look at that. Okay, so this is, like I said, a tedious problem and one that you ought to take your time doing. But what ends up happening even after any of these, I'm going to close this one out. What ends up happening with any of these is that we probably want to do more analysis. We probably want to learn more about the what ifs. You know, what if this, what if that? I don't know, we just made some up to go with this problem. And one of them has to do with, you know, firing people, because right now we're firing people. And so there's a question that says, at what firing cost would the model suggest to not fire any workers? So we're gonna use solver tables to do these things. And when you think about solver table, you say to yourself, okay, what's my input that I'm changing in order to look at an output that answers my question, okay? So the question was, is there a firing cost at which you would not fire people anymore? Okay, in other words, it gets so high that it doesn't even make sense you wouldn't even fire them. Okay, you just keep them, it'd be cheaper to keep them. Okay. So what's the input that we're going to be varying? The firing cost. Okay, so So the firing cost is the input that we're gonna vary. What's the output that will answer the question? The number that we fire. Now, it is perfectly okay if we just looked at all 6 of these and said, okay, see, we're firing here, and then look for when we're not firing people. But there is a fast way to just make one cell out of this and just say, no, okay, I'm gonna type that much. Number fired. And over here, just make a little box. Okay, you don't have to make the box. But just sum this up and just put it all into one cell, essentially. So what we're saying is, did we fire people in this model? Yes, we did. Over the course of the 6 months, we fired 3 people, okay? That is a perfect output cell for our question. Is there a firing cost at which we would not fire people anymore? And we would be looking and realizing we didn't fire people when this number is 0, you know, when we don't fire anybody. And so since that's gonna be a really nice output cell, and we don't always have to do, you know, create it. We could have just looked at the 6 different cells, but I think it's nice to create the cell. I am gonna name that output cell. I am gonna name it fired number. I can type it. Okay, something like that. I think I abbreviate it probably on the other stuff. And the reason I do that is because I know that's gonna be my output cell and solver table. When something's gonna be my output cell and solver table, I name it. Okay. All right, so go into solver table. Run solver table. We're only varying the one thing, so it, oh, say yes. No, we're only varying the one thing, so go to one-way table. And what was that one thing we were varying? We just said it. The firing cost, which is right there in B12. Okay, I think it's always a good idea to put these names in here. B12, the firing cost. That's what we're gonna vary. I did not put any parameters on this PowerPoint because I think that sometimes we just wanna talk about that. And I think it's easier if I don't put the parameters on there, then we have to talk about it. Where would we start? What would be our minimum value that we would start with and go from there? Right, okay, not 0, 5,000, and here's why. Okay, think about this. When it costs us 5,000, we fire people, right? Okay. So we're for sure gonna fire people if it's 4,000, 3,000, 2,000, I mean, we have no reason to go below 5,000. We already know that that's not too expensive for us to fire people. So we might as well just start at 5,000. On the other end of that though, when I say what should we do as our maximum, you don't know. You don't know. We don't know when that point is gonna come, when it's going to be cheaper to keep them than to fire them, okay? We don't know at that point. But I can tell you, in reality, you pick a number. You can't make it gigantic. You're not gonna say, you know, 100,000 and do this in steps of 10. I mean, it was like, okay, that would make your solver tables last a lifetime. Well, they'd crash or something, I don't know. So you've gotta be kind of realistic, but if you picked a number, and you ran solver table, and you were still firing people, you just go back in and raise the number a little higher, that's all. In reality, that's what you have to do. That's what people would do, you know, they would say, oh, gosh, we're still firing people at $10,000 or whatever. We need to go up higher than that. You aren't always gonna have PowerPoints with numbers on them or tests with parameters in them. So if you didn't, you know, if you were still firing people, you'd raise the number and you'd run it again. So I'm just gonna give us one so we don't have to do that. Let's take this all the way up to 15,000. And again, I don't want this to be gigantic, but let's do it in increments of 500. Okay, let's do increments of 500. So from 5,000 to 15,000 in increments of 500, that's how I'm gonna vary B12, the firing cost. And my output cell is the cell I just created for this. I just purposely made this cell. I don't wanna say the cell reference because you may have put yours in a different spot. But it's that cell that I just made that sums up how many people I fired, because it's a perfect cell to tell me if I did or didn't fire people, okay? And when I run this one, and in this room things are going a little slow, not too bad. It takes mine a minute up here. eventually do look at this, I see that, when do I stop firing people? Yeah, when I get to 10,500, I no longer fire people. It's cheaper to keep them. Again, partly a function of the limited time span that we're working on and everything else, but, you know, that's telling me that's when it's become too high to even bother firing. So we don't. Back over to the model. So sometimes creating our own specific output cell is a really concise and maybe even the best way to approach answering the problem. Okay, so we did that. We created our own little output cell. So in the past, we've kind of always done this with the next question, only to turn it around and for me to think it's actually not the best thing, but I'm gonna do this to start out with. The next bullet point says, at what advertising effectiveness, it's currently $10 for each additional unit, would the model not maximize advertising? We max out on our advertising right now. Apparently, it's a really good deal to spend $10 and get a unit of demand. We use every penny we can on advertising. Would there be a point where that ad cost would be too expensive, like it wouldn't be worth it to max out our advertising, okay? So our input, our changing cell, the thing that we would be, changing would be what?
The cost of advertising.
The cost of the advertising. Then our output would be, good question. Our output could be a number of different things. This is how we always used to do it. We would say, well, if you looked at the minimum advertising, okay, so if you looked at the minimum value in that range of all the advertising, if it was ever anything less than 50,000, then we didn't max out, right? Okay, so that's one way to answer the question, and yes, that would answer the question. If it was ever anything less than 50,000, then we weren't maxing out. I mean, I think another reasonable thing would be to say the total advertising. When you sum up the advertising and you've maxed out 50,000 for 6 months straight, it's 300,000. If it was ever less than 300,000, then you didn't max out your advertising. Both of those cells would answer the question. Okay, but let's run it with that. Let me just do the min advertising one. Only reason I say that is because I'm going to name that cell. Okay, so let's just do that. Let's run a solver table. Yes, we have this. We're only varying the ad cost. We talked about that. Okay, clear everything out that's in your solver table right now. Unfortunately, no reset button. So just clear all that out. Okay. So clear this. We just discussed how the input cell would be the advertising cost right there in B13, that it would be that. So ad cost is going to be that. What's a good starting point here? For the parameters for varying this, what would be a good minimum starting point? What's that?
10.
Yeah, I mean, we know we max out at 10, so we for sure don't need to go 9, 8, 7, 6. I mean, we would max out there too, so 10 is a good starting point. What's a kind of a logical stopping point for this? Yeah, okay, so we sell them for 75, so we don't need to say, oh, let's go up to 100 and 10. Why? We would never do that. We would never pay more than we sell them for. Now, granted, we're not even gonna pay as much as we sell them for because we know there are other costs associated with that, but that's a pretty easy justifiable number to put in there. Okay, go up to 75. Obviously, we were never going to even, go past that because that's what we sell them for. And then if I'm gonna do that, then I'm probably gonna wanna increment it in units of 5 because it'll work out better for me. So take B13, the ad cost, go from 10 to 75 in increments of 5, and I'm going to look at the output cell that I named on minimum advertising, because I just want to look and see, is there ever a time I don't max out? And I click OK, wait that one. And I get sort of interestingly weird results from this. So I'm maxing out, and then at 35, I'm not. At $40, I'm not. At 45, I am again. Okay. At 50, I'm not maxing. At 55, I'm not maxing out. At 60, I'm not maxing out. And here's the thing right here. And this is why the one cell approach to this one is probably not the best approach. I think a lot of people would look at this and say, oh, and we don't advertise when it gets to 65. That's not what that says. This says there is 1 month that we don't advertise. Could be 2, could be 3, could be 6. We don't know, and that's a problem. But there is at least 1 month we don't advertise, and that's all we know from this. And so then you start to realize, while that question will while that output cell will answer the question, it doesn't maybe give you the kind of detail that you might like. And so in this particular instance, it probably would have been better to have just seen all 6 months, because we get a lot more information that way. You don't have to do this part, but I'm gonna real quick name these cells because I'm gonna use all 6 of those cells as output. So I'm picking up a range that has the text label and the 6 cells, and I'm going to formulas and creating a name from that selection. It uses the left column, done. You don't even really know it did it, but it did it. Okay. Because I'm gonna go back into solver table, the one that we just did. Run it, yes, it's one way. You go back into solver table. Don't change this part of solver table. Just change what you see as output. So I'm gonna get rid of that output cell. And instead, I wanna see all 6 months of advertising, because I get a lot more detail. I get a lot more information if I would see all 6 months from B32 to G32. And I don't think that that takes an excessively long time. It comes up pretty quick. Okay, and what I discover is a little bit more information. When I didn't max out at the $35 mark, that was just in 1 month. And it was just in 2 months that I didn't max out at 40. Then I went back to maxing out. Then there was just 1 month at 50, 1 month at 55, and then at 60 there were several that half of them that I didn't max out. At 65, where we weren't sure whether we advertised at all, we did. In half the months we advertised and half we didn't. Okay, and so that gives us a little bit better picture. So this might be one of those instances where you wouldn't necessarily want to do the 1 cell thing. It's very concise with the number of people fired. But in here, it's too concise. You know, like it doesn't give you all the detail you might want to have. There's like more information you might want. Okay, so we're good with that one? So the next one's a shift in what we're doing. Because the next bullet point asks us, how much would we be willing to pay for each 1% increase in worker productivity? Doesn't matter how we do it, just a worker productivity increase. Right now, here's our productivity level, 600 units per worker per month. So that's how much they can make. I'm gonna, for the first time with our models, do something that we'll do a lot of times after this. And that's modify the model to incorporate the ability to change it into the model, okay? So where this number is 600 right now, I don't want that to be a static 600 anymore. I want it to be something that can change incrementally by 1%, okay? I want it to be something that can change. So what I'm gonna do is kind of go over here to the side and put a couple of labels in. Percent change, and right below it I'll put 0%. And then over here I'm gonna put the original number in here of 600. Okay, so these cells right here, they don't have any formulas or functions. I've just typed in a couple of labels, a couple of numbers, that's all. With the original 600, I put the percent change, I left it at 0 for now. I've left it at 0%. Because what I wanna do is make this number, that is the number that's used in the model, right? I want that cell right there to be a function of those 2 numbers. I want it to no longer be a static number. I want it to be something that can change, okay? So what I wanted to do is be the original number incremented by a percent, which I can do by saying plus the original number times the percent. That's one way. Or you can do the original number times in parentheses 1 plus. Yeah, I mean, you can do whichever one you want. You know how to increment by percent. I'm good with either one. This is what I put in. Okay, so this is a function of an original number and a percent that is gonna be the number that I end up changing, okay? Okay, so it's not a static number anymore. Because when I run a solver table, remember what solver table does? It changes an input, run solver, tells you the output. Well, see, what's gonna happen is when I change an input, so this is gonna be my input, when I change it, it changes that, okay? Run solver and tells me the output. Change this, it changes that, run solver. You know, so that's how solver table is gonna work for me now with this modified model that I've never done that before, but I've modified this original model. So let's go into solver table. That percent change right there is gonna be the only cell I change. This is gonna be a one-way table. I will clear all this stuff out. Okay. Clear your thing. Alright, so I've set this up specifically so that that cell, I don't know where you have yours, you know, as far as like the cell reference, but that cell that has that percent in it, that's gonna be my input cell. That's gonna be the one that I change. And that is going to be percent change. I'll spell it right. Now, you don't know what I wanted to do on here. I won't even just leave this open, but we would start at 0 simply because we're gonna start at where we are now and go up from there. But let's go up to 20%, which would be 0.2. And it did say for each additional 1%, so we do know that the increment should be 1%, so 0.01. So let's vary wherever your cell is, that percent change right there, okay, from 0 to 0.2 in 0.01 or 1% increments. Okay. Now, what's the output? Reread the question. How much would you be willing to pay for each 1% increase in work productivity? How much would you be willing to pay?
No wages.
Not wages. Think about what you would be willing to pay. How do you know what you'd be willing to pay? We pay for something when it's gonna do what? Think about the t-shirt example. We did the little t-shirts. We said, okay, if you've been offered more time on the machine, or say you were offered more time on the machine, we had calculated, 15-minute increments. Would you pay this much for a 15-minute increment? Well, you would, when? If your profit increased by more than that amount, okay? So we're willing to pay for something that's going to make more money for us. I will give you $10 for this if this will make $20 for me, okay? So what am I willing to pay for something? The incremental difference in profit. If it makes more money for me, I would be willing to pay something up to that amount, okay? So that, now I didn't name the cell, but that's okay. We'll let it go this time. That cell, that profit cell, that's my output cell, because that's how I'll be able to tell whether or not it made money for me, and therefore I would be willing to pay some amount for it, okay? Okay, so I don't know where your percent change cell was, but wherever that was, okay, 0 to 0.2 and 0.01 increments, and let it be profit that's your output cell. You will get results. Okay. Now, when we did this with the machine, and you have these 15-minute extra increments, all this stuff, the way I do it is just find the difference. How much did I make when they were 1% faster than I did when they were at the original starting point? Well, I made $4,756 extra. I do recognize that in these kind of models with this many variables, that that's not necessarily just gonna be straight, always that, and whoops. And so I copy it the rest of the way down, and I realize that that varies between these 1% increments. But I also see something really weird in here. All of a sudden, I start seeing these negative numbers. And I'm thinking to myself, that does not make sense, that I just made my workers more productive and I just made less money, okay? That does not make sense. And you're right, it doesn't make sense. The only way you understand what was happening here is when you realize how Solver solves, especially when it has integer constraints on it. Here's what Solver does. It has this integer optimality that it's trying to find the best solution for you, right? That's what we think, it's trying to find the best solution. Well, it turns out, by default, Solver is trying to get within 1% of the best solution when it has these integers, okay? Which means it's not always getting to the absolute best. Now, we haven't had a problem with this. Our models have all been really small. We've gotten to the best solution every time, okay? But we get into this one now, and all of a sudden, when it got within 1% of the best solution, it stopped, okay? And that's why you get these weird numbers. So let me show you what to do. You go back into the model, and you go into Solver, not Solver table, but Solver. It's all set up and it's all good, but there is a button here that says Options. And by default, your integer optimality, which you never ever looked at, never even knew was there, is set at 1%, where it was trying to get within 1% of the best answer that it could. And that's for good reason, because some models are really big and you cannot force it to get all the way. I mean, it would just an endless amount of time or crash or do whatever. But ours isn't that big, so let's make ours 0. Let's turn that to 0. Let's force it to get to the absolute best, not just within 1% of the best. Okay. So I'm gonna click OK and solve again. And I will notice that, well, okay. On my original numbers, I actually didn't change this. Okay, so it actually didn't change our original solution. Go back into Solver table. Back into Solver table. Run it, yes, one way. Don't change anything on here. It's fine. We just want to redo Solver table on a model that now solves to the best that it possibly can, okay? It may take a little longer. I don't think it will take that much longer, but let's go ahead now and just run this exact same Solver table again. Click OK. When we're asking it to do that, it could take a little longer, but all right, let's do that. What's the difference between them thing again? At 1% versus the original, I still make $4,756. So those two numbers are not different. Okay, those two numbers did not change. But you don't see any negative numbers in here now. You're always either getting better or one time you're staying the same. But anyway, you're getting better, which makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? But whenever I answered these questions, unless the question said between 1% faster and 2% faster, how much, if it doesn't ask that, then my best way to answer is to say something like, on average, we make about this much extra, and therefore I'd be willing to pay something up to that amount. And if you look at the average on this, and it's real fuzzy here, but you can look at your own screen, it's $39.89. So on average, I'm willing to pay about something up to $3,989 to get them 1% faster, right? Okay. But I want us to flash back to the last one where I had those negative numbers in there. Look at the average, $39.89. Okay. So, moral to that story. I'm just trying to say, don't stress over this. There are going to be times where you can't set something to a 0%. You just can't. And that's okay. When you're doing something like a solver table, those differences, those overages and underages, you know, they're going to flush themselves out. You know, they're going to balance themselves out because the average on this is the same as the average on the other one, even when this one didn't have the 0 set, you know, and the next one did. Okay, so don't, you know, And don't worry about this, to be honest with you, I want you to know that this exists, but I don't want you to worry about this a lot going forward, because our models will all pretty much just be fine, just setting, just leaving whatever is in there. It's not gonna change things a great deal, it just happened to change it in this one, when we did, a solver table on it. But don't stress over that, don't worry about it. But it is a good thing to know, it is good to have this information to realize that's how it works, yeah.
So in the real world, in the industry,
Yeah.
how much do you maybe with that percentage?
I would say in the real world, with the kind of problems you have, there's no way you could put it at 0. And I also would suggest that you probably can't use integer on a lot of things, because integer programming changes the problem and makes it a more difficult problem than the regular linear programming is. And so when things are really, really, really big,